play winning teams the rest of the season after this weekend. That, again, is why, and that's why what you said is perfect. It's a disappointment because that door is wide open. But, I mean, because of the schedule, it's still going to be there for them. They can go on a, I mean, look at that. I mean, just with Minnesota, Houston, and the White Sox coming up. I mean, which of course is where you expect them to go 5-4 through those 9 games instead of going, 7-2 or 8-1 or something like that and getting some separation. But you'll get, your final shot here. Anybody that is, hey, they're still in it and they still have a chance. This is that run where we'll see if they gain any ground. I want to ask you something. Bruce called earlier, and I mentioned this. I want to see if you agree with me or not. I know Terry Francona last year, they couldn't have built his statue fast enough, and this year, more of the, I guess people are complaining more and the cracks are showing. I disagree, though. I say way more than last year, where really it seemed like everything just kind of worked out. Every move the Indians made kind of just worked out in their favor last year for the most part. I think the job he did this year, as we keep saying, well, they got all these problems and they're sitting here at 500 within a couple of games of the playoffs. Everything that could have went wrong did. I say this shows you what kind of a manager you've got in Terry Francona, because if you had a bum manager, this team could easily be 30 games under 500 right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Terry Francona has done a great job of kind of keeping this season together. And, I mean, we could fill the next hour with all the things that are wrong with this team. And, I think it was a week or so ago, I was joking and said, you watch this team on the field, and if you don't look at the standings, you say this team is not very good. And then you look at the standings and you go, they're still in it. Well, I think Terry Francona has a lot to do with that. And, I definitely think he's, I don't think he's batted 1,000. I think he's made some mistakes this year.
Oh, yeah.
But I think if you look at the product, the overall product, I mean, if you're doing pluses and minuses to this season, I mean, obviously, the breakout years are the drastically improved years and growth of Corey Kluber and Michael Brantley, I mean, go at the top of the list. But I completely agree with you. I think the next thing I would put on that list would be, the things that Terry Francona has done as a manager to keep this team held together. And I think he should get a lot of credit for it, because, I mean, I think it's easy to say that. I don't know how you certainly can't blame Terry Francona, I don't think, for them being 500. I think you have to credit him for being 500. And I think it's easy to go back to that 2012 season, the year before he was here, and you look at that year with Manny Acta. And I think Manny Acta is just the easy example or point of comparison because he was here. But I think if you look at that year and you look at a manager like Manny Acta, I agree with you. I think if they're running this team's out of it a long time ago. And so I think Terry Francona, makes this team go. He's definitely in the positive of things that make this organization, effective. And I look at that 2012 season, and that was a team that, putted along and kind of pretended to contend for 4 months and ran out of gas and fell apart. And I think, there was a mental breakdown in that locker room when they didn't make a deal at the deadline. And you look at this season, and there's no quit in this team. And I think a lot of that has to do with Francona. And, I mean, I think you can compare those two teams very easily and see the different directions that they've gone. And I think a lot of that is on Terry Francona.
For sure. I agree with you. Again, 100%, my man. And it'll be interesting to see how this season finishes up. I mean, again, every time that I want to go, hey, so looking at the future, I look at the next few weeks and I go, but man, when you got a cupcake run like that coming, man, even a 500 team can plow some fields here, man. But we'll see what comes with that. I wanted to talk to you a little bit too about, and one of the other things, by the way, that Bruce mentioned, which you and I had kind of texted a little bit about yesterday. And he has a great point. here's a team that's right there, and it kind of ties right into you with them, the door being wide open. You're within a handful of games. You're right there. Everybody, well, at least the hardcore fan base believes that you have the opportunity here in front of you. But yet, how do you look at your fan base and tell them that you're not planning for next year and that you're trying to win this year when your bottom three hitters are all rookies, you know? And I know some of that is because of the way things have worked out with the injuries and getting hit and kind of being in a pinch. It's not like they said, hey, let's throw all the rookies out there and see what happens. But that is kind of a hard thing to overlook when you're sitting that close.
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, I think in my mind, this is an example of maybe the unfairness in Major League Baseball, and maybe also just how fine of a line and how tough Chris Antonetti's job is, and other things that I could fill the next hour for. I think Chris Antonetti, if Terry Francona is to be, you know, regarded for keeping them 500, I would blame Chris Antonetti for them being 500. But I think the fine line that he has to walk is so difficult. And I think this is a prime example. I think if you are a baseball-minded person, you look at this team and you know that they have tons of flaws. And if they get into the playoffs, I mean, they're one and done in a wild card, most likely, or they're done in the first round, even if they get to that division series. I mean, I think anybody would say it would be a shock for them to win a playoff series against anyone. So with all of that in mind, you know, I think it's easy, and I've been, you know, one of those guys who has advocated, you know, trying to position yourself to put together a better team for 2015. But in the same regard, you have such a fragile fan base here. How do you say that or do that and just kind of, I don't know, continue to sleepwalk through the last 40 games and see what happens? I think I have to believe they walk into work, Chris Antonetti and his front office people, and have that conversation daily and say, if not hourly, and say, what do we do? Because I think making a move to improve this team is kind of silly, because it would likely be a short-term move, and I'm not sure that any one player fixes this team in any way. And in the same breath, how do you continue to do nothing when the door is wide open? I would assume that they are looking to try and make a move that helps them now and in the future. And that is a real tough move to make right now, with only 40 games left and with so many teams in both leagues still in it and having to slide guys through waivers. So I see where they're going, and I think it's probably the right move. But I understand, you know, what you guys say and what Bruce says. And, I mean, it's kind of hard to say, well, the door's wide open, the Tigers are crumbling, and, you know, our schedule sizes up well, but let's keep running Zach Walters and Tyler Holt and Jose Ramirez out there.
I agree with you. No, trust me, I do. I mean, and that's the thing, is that here's one of the things that, like, when I think about baseball and some of the problems just with the sport in general, with attendance, and I think of the Cleveland and just all of that. I mean, one of the things that people don't, I think, add to the equation is the investment that comes with the baseball season that's different. I know you could say it's the same. Well, there's a 4-month season in football. It's only 6 months in baseball. It's not that much of a difference, but there is. It's a day in and day out, the minutia of the everyday of a 162 game season. It is, and I mean this, it's a credit to baseball fans, because it takes an incredible investment to be a legitimate day-to-day fan of Major League Baseball compared to the other sports. Football, you can talk about it any time, but you check in once or twice a week and the game's once a week, and it's a much more focused event type thing. The day-to-day of baseball makes it such an investment that when you look at your fan base, and this is the problem the Indians have, is getting people to invest, because and I've said, a lot of times they wait until, we'll see if they're still in contention in July and August and all of that. So, people are always waiting to see, but then like you said, then you get to a point like this, and I think it hurts the sport, because if I'm a fan and if I've invested 4.5 months, day to day into following this team and supporting them and arguing with people who say that it's Brown season, and I go, man, no, it's still Indian season. And then, like you say, we're sitting here and we're trotting these guys out and we're pretending to contend, but we're happy getting ready for next year too, and we're walking that line. That makes me not want to invest in a whole season. And that, I think, is part of what has happened here in Cleveland. You have a fan base that goes, fast forward, hey, wake me up in August, wake me up in September. If the Indians are still in it, then I'll start paying attention to the stretch run. I'll start going to some games later in the season, because 9 times out of 10, they're not in it by that point. So I'm not going to invest my April, May, June, and July for a team that's going to give up in August, and that's a problem.
I couldn't agree with everything you just said more. I mean, I think you are spot on, and as you were laying that out, I was even thinking in my head, obviously I cover and watch the Indians on a day-to-day basis, and even through the winter, through our website. And behind the scenes, I'm doing some work on the site right now and doing like some reorganization and kind of categorizing things. So I'm going back through tons of stories and stuff, and it blows my mind, things that I see from this season at times, and I'm like, I can't believe that is still, that was a storyline 3 months ago. Like, we forgot all about that. I mean, we have posts about how good Zach McAllister was in April, and I'm like, we can't believe that this was the same season, and the same thing that, the outrage that Josh Tomlin, didn't get the 5th starter spot out of spring training because he outpitched everyone, and they still went with Carlos Carrasco. And I'm like, and you look at it now and you're like, those things seem like 1,000 years ago. And those were storylines at the beginning of this season. And, I mean, John Axford was the closer of this team into May. And I feel like Cody Allen has been the closer of this team, for 1,000 years. And I think it goes all with what you said. And the season is so long, and it's hard to make that investment. And, I think it's one of those things where, I mean, I have had this conversation with people, and people get defensive of it, but there are times I said, I think the attendance problem can be summarized so simply in, I really just, for that reason that you just summed up right there, the investment is so long, and so often they get to August and September, and there isn't a lot to play for. The investment in the season is so much that I just think in so many ways this town is just not a baseball town. And I think with the exception of the 90s, it's kind of been that way since the 1950s. And we know the 90s are that perfect storm where everything went right. And as you kind of outlined there, it was a long season even in the 90s, but you knew you were in it. And you knew you were in it from day one because that team was so loaded. And, you weren't talking about if they could make a move to sneak into the playoffs. You were talking about making a move to win the World Series. And so I think that investment then was so much different than it was before the 90s and after.
But, I mean, even that is 20 years ago. And I know, listen, if you're a baseball fan, you're going to you're going to follow it no matter what. But exactly, when you're talking about the investment, you know, you go back to the golden age of baseball, the 50s and 60s. I mean, not only was there less sports, there was less everything. Like, baseball got you from spring to fall. You know what I mean? Baseball was kind of the thing. That was what I mean, I think of my life, your life, Mike. I mean, we got kids. When summer hits, it's not a vacation. It's a vacation for them, but you have nonstop things to do. I mean, just